Buying secondhand furniture is usually harmless. You save money, and sometimes you even get lucky with a great find. But this next story proves that some bargains come with a much darker cost, one that follows you home. I had just moved into a new apartment and didn't have much furniture. Money was tight, so I turned to Craigslist, hoping to score something cheap. That's where I saw it, an old but decent-looking couch, listed for only $50. The seller lived about 20 minutes away, and when I pulled up to the address, the couch was already sitting out on the curb under a flickering streetlight. I expected to at least meet the owner, but no one ever came outside. Instead, an envelope was taped to the armrest with $50 written across the front in thick marker. I slipped the cash inside, loaded the couch into my truck, and drove off into the night. Looking back, I should have taken that strange, silent transaction as my first warning sign. That night, I set the couch against the wall of my living room. It wasn't the most comfortable thing in the world, but it definitely beat sitting on the floor. Around midnight, while I was zoning out in front of the TV, I thought I heard something. At first, it was so faint. I thought I imagined it, but when I muted the television, there it was again, a soft scratching sound. I leaned closer, trying to figure out where it was coming from. My stomach dropped when I realized it wasn't coming from the walls or the floor. It was coming from inside the couch. At first, I brushed it off as a mouse. The noise was delicate, almost rhythmic, like tiny claws raking against fabric. But the more I listened, the stranger it seemed. It wasn't constant. The scratching would stop for several seconds, then start up again, almost as if something inside was shifting or adjusting its position. Scritch. 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 Each scrape seemed to echo in the quiet apartment. I grabbed a flashlight and angled it between the cushions, but all I could see was blackness. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning and went to bed, but even as I lay in the dark, I could swear I still heard it faintly. The sound of something scratching, moving, waiting. By the next evening, I'd had enough. I wanted to see exactly what was living inside my bargain couch. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and kneeled beside it, running the blade carefully along the seam in the back. As soon as the fabric gave way, the sound stopped. The silence was deafening, like whatever was inside knew it had been caught. I pulled the fabric back, bracing myself for a nest of mice, or worse. But instead of fur or droppings, I saw wires, thin black wires, snaking deep into the cushion. My heart started hammering in my chest. I reached in, tugging at the wires until they pulled free. What I held in my hands didn't make sense at first. It was a tiny camera, no bigger than a lighter, the lens pointing outward as if it had been watching me this whole time. The camera was wired into the couch itself, hidden so deeply you would never notice it unless you cut it open. My stomach turned as the realization sank in. This wasn't about mice at all. This couch had been recording me, wasn't coming from the walls or the floor. It was coming from inside the couch. In a panic, I tore the couch apart, ripping open the cushions and feeling inside. What I found made my skin crawl. There wasn't just one camera. There were 3 of them, each carefully placed to capture different angles of whoever sat down. Someone had gone to disturbing lengths to hide them. Whoever owned this couch before hadn't just been selling furniture, they'd been setting traps. And now, because I had taken it home, They knew exactly where I lived. I stuffed the cameras into a plastic bag and drove straight to the police station. The officer at the front desk listened carefully as I explained what I found. He examined the devices, frowning deeply before telling me something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't the first report they'd had. Other people in nearby towns had found hidden cameras inside cheap Craigslist furniture too. Couches, mattresses, even desks. Whoever was behind it was watching strangers in their own homes. And worse, they had never been caught. I got rid of the couch the very next morning. But that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something on my dresser. A small folded note that hadn't been there before. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were just 4 words, written in shaky handwriting. "Nice place you've got." My stomach dropped. Not only had they been watching me, they'd already been inside my home. I never bought secondhand furniture again, and I never will. But this next story proves that some bargains come with a much darker cost, one that follows you home. Would you ever trust buying used furniture again after hearing this story? Dogs have a way of sensing things we can't. They bark at shadows, growl at empty corners, and sometimes they refuse to leave a spot for reasons we'll never understand. But for one person, their dog wasn't just barking at shadows. It was warning them about something, or someone, standing right outside their window. I live in a small cabin out in the woods. It's peaceful most of the time, but the kind of peace that can also feel isolating. My only real company is my dog, Scout, a big shepherd mix who never leaves my side. The nights out here are dark, so dark that once the sun goes down, the forest turns into a black wall of trees. No streetlights, no passing cars. Just the wind, the crickets, and the occasional rustle of something moving through the brush. One night around 11 p.m., Scout lifted his head from the floor and let out a low growl. At first, I brushed it off. He sometimes reacts to raccoons or deer wandering close to the cabin. But this time felt different. His ears were pinned back, his hackles raised, and his growl was steady, almost like he was warning me. I muted the TV and listened. The cabin was silent, except for the faint scratching of tree branches against the roof. Then Scout turned his head sharply toward the window. The window faced the front yard, which led directly into the woods. When I followed Scout's gaze, I froze. At first, I thought I saw a shadow crouching low to the ground. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't just a shadow. It was a man. He was pressed up against the outside of the window, crouched low, his face tilted upward. He wasn't moving. He was just smiling. This wide, unnatural grin stretched across his face. And then he opened his mouth and started making sounds. Barking, mimicking my dog. Scout went ballistic, barking furiously at the glass. But the man didn't flinch. He just stayed there, crouched down, grinning and barking back at him. My blood ran cold as I realized this wasn't some drunk hiker or lost camper. Whoever this was, they were enjoying this. I stood up slowly, not wanting to take my eyes off him, and reached for the porch light switch. For a split second, I hesitated, almost afraid of what I'd see when the darkness lifted. The second the porch light flicked on, the man's expression changed. That smile dropped into something feral, and then, before I could even process it, he bolted, but not in the way a normal person runs. He dropped down onto all fours and sprinted into the tree line like an animal. The speed, the way his limbs moved. It didn't look natural. Within seconds, he was swallowed by the darkness of the woods, leaving only the sound of my dog's barking echoing into the night. I locked every door and window and stayed up the rest of the night with Scout at my side. I kept expecting to hear him scratching at the glass again, or worse, see that grin pressed against the window. But he never came back. The next morning, I checked outside. In the dirt below the window, I found footprints. They started human, bare feet pressed into the soil. But the farther they led into the woods, the stranger they became. The impressions were longer, almost hand-shaped, spaced apart as if someone had run on all fours. I don't know who or what that man was. I never saw him again, but every night since, Scout still sits by the window, watching. Sometimes, long after midnight, he lets out that same low growl, his eyes fixed on the dark tree line. I never look out anymore, because part of me is terrified that if I do, I'll see that same face smiling back at me. If your dog kept staring at your window and growling at night, would you have the courage to look outside?
I used to live in an old apartment complex built back in the 1970s. It wasn't the nicest place. Paint peeling off the walls, pipes that clanked every time someone used the water, and vents that rattled whenever the air conditioning kicked in. But the rent was cheap, and when you're broke, you don't ask for much more than 4 walls and a roof. The walls were so thin that I could hear my neighbors' conversations, their TV shows, even their late-night arguments. But one sound in particular started to bother me. A cough. At first, it was nothing unusual, just a dry, scratchy cough that I would hear late at night, usually sometime after 1 in the morning. I assumed it was my upstairs neighbor, but the coughing didn't go away. Night after night, around the same time, I'd hear it. Always faint, always from above. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was so quiet that I sometimes wondered if I was imagining it. But it was real enough to keep me awake. One night, at around 2 in the morning, I was lying in bed with the lights off, scrolling through my phone, when I heard something new. Not a cough. Whispering. It was so faint I thought it might have been my imagination. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became. The sound wasn't coming through the walls. It was coming from the vent above my bed. I muted my phone and held my breath. That's when I heard it. A voice. Clear as day, it said, "He's awake." I sat up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I stared at the vent, the slats glowing faintly in the dark, and then I saw it. A pale, bloodshot eye staring back at me. It blinked once and disappeared. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, like I'd been glued to the bed. Finally, I snapped out of it, grabbed my keys, and ran out of the apartment barefoot. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my car, staring at the windows of my own apartment, wondering if someone was still up there, watching. The next morning, I went to the leasing office and told them everything. The manager looked at me like I was crazy, but eventually agreed to have maintenance check the ducts. That afternoon, one of the workers came back shaking his head. He told me they found food wrappers, empty water bottles, and even a dirty blanket stuffed inside the ductwork. Vents in the building were old and wide enough for a slim person to crawl through, connecting multiple apartments. The maintenance guy said he'd never seen anything like it, and the worst part? Whoever had been up there was gone. That night, I left the lights on and tried to sleep with a baseball bat by my side. I kept telling myself it was over. But around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. The coughing, then the whispering. I held my breath, staring at the vent above me. That's when I heard it. The metallic screech of the vent cover shifting. Someone was trying to push it open. I bolted from my bed, grabbed my keys, and ran out again, not even stopping to look back. The next day, I returned with a police officer. They searched the ducts, the roof, everything. They didn't find anyone. But they confirmed what the maintenance guy already knew. Someone had been living in the vents. There were scratch marks in the dust where hands and knees had dragged through. A pile of trash was stuffed into a larger duct, like a nest, but whoever had been there was gone. The building sealed the vents shut after that. I moved out 2 weeks later, and to this day, whenever I hear the hum of an air vent in a quiet room, I can't help but remember that pale, bloodshot eye staring back at me, because once you've seen something like that, you never forget it.